Hello, great and bountiful YouTube empire. I'm your host, Chiin Ferno, and today I'm starting a new series, one that I'm pretty excited about. This series goes beyond just sitting at a computer and playing a game. I mean, I'll be sitting at a computer and I will be playing a game, but beyond that, this series is about exploring a world that many of us love, the land of Hyrule. While playing Nintendo's 2017 Game of the Year, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, I found myself repeatedly comparing the map for Breath of the Wild to the maps from previous Zelda games. Anyone who's played Breath of the Wild and paid any amount of attention to the map of Hyrule should notice some of the obvious references and allusions to older games in the series, like Mikau Lake and Colonel Peak among many others. But how well do you really know Hyrule? Over the course of the franchise, the Kingdom of Hyrule has evolved through numerous iterations. What was once a simple, flat map has transformed into what is now a fully realized world. As a Hyrule historian and a Zelda scholar, one thing that has always frustrated me about the many iterations of Hyrule were the inconsistencies. Nintendo isn't exactly known for keeping a consistent lore in their games, preferring to be flexible to allow creativity, which is why I don't see myself ever trying to do a theory about a Mario game. But Zelda has always been a bit different. With many direct sequels and a recently established timeline of events which, contrary to popular belief, doesn't feature any major plot holes that I couldn't figure out, it's clear that even despite the focus on creativity over consistency, Eiji Aonuma and the Zelda dev team at least try to maintain some form of established lore. Despite this, the geography of Hyrule remains a confusing mystery. In many instances, these different versions seem to combat each other, or were incomplete, or had sections blocked off by clouds. Breath of the Wild is the first Zelda game to give us a map of Hyrule in its entirety. That is to say, Breath of the Wild is the first game to include most, if not every location from Hyrule's past, giving the player the most comprehensive map of Hyrule to date. There are no clouds or uncharted areas, no angles that block one side of the map, just a full, straight-up map of Hyrule. No gimmicks, no blocks. Recognizing the markers takes just a bit of knowledge of Hyrule history, and just because the map is comprehensive, that doesn't mean that things look the same as they did in Ocarina of Time or A Link to the Past. Time passes, things change, and of course we have to take the art style and technical aspects into consideration. But if you've played other Legend of Zelda games, there are clear location markers from past games that we can use to fill out our Breath of the Wild map, with links of and to the past. So join me as I explore the evolution of the maps of Hyrule by finding them on the map of Breath of the Wild. At its core, that's what this series is about, reading between the lines and uncovering the true history of Hyrule. So welcome to The Legend of Zelda Map Mysteries. Before we get started, this show assumes that you've completed or at a minimum played Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, so if you're afraid of spoilers, you've been warned. Now, let's start with some background. In Breath of the Wild, ancient machines designed to defeat Ganon, the enemy of Hyrule, were uncovered. These machines were called the Divine Beasts and Guardians. In an effort to combat Ganon's inevitable return, the King of Hyrule had the machines restored. Unfortunately, things did not work out the way anyone would have expected. Upon Ganon's resurrection, he hacked all of the machines, causing them to lay waste to the Kingdom of Hyrule. This calamitous event resulted in the death of Hyrule's hero, Link. Link was laid to rest in the Shrine of Resurrection, leaving Princess Zelda to fight Ganon alone. She used her power to seal him away in Hyrule Castle, where they waged a 100-year struggle, while the Kingdom of Hyrule was left to wait for the return of Link to defeat Calamity Ganon once and for all. And this is where The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild starts. The Divine Beasts and Guardians have destroyed much of Hyrule, Zelda is stuck in Hyrule Castle with Ganon, and the lost souls of the champions tasked to pilot the Divine Beasts are instead trapped by them. Upon awakening from his slumber, Link must travel across the whole of Hyrule, restoring the Divine Beast to release these trapped souls and reach Hyrule Castle, where he, with a little help from Zelda, can finally defeat Calamity Ganon. So we've set the stage for the Breath of the Wild gameplay, but let me cover one more thing. Before we get into our first map theory, I think it's important to establish that for this series, I'll be assuming that Breath of the Wild takes place at the end of the child timeline. The evidence is almost indisputable, and as this particular map theory may even prove, it goes much deeper than a yellow hat band in the presence of Lynels. So if you're interested in the evidence that supports this particular theory, just drop me a line in the comment section below and I'll follow this series with a more in-depth discussion. But for now, allow me to briefly go over the basis for my belief. First, the obvious, the direct mentioning of Twilight Princess.
Whether skyward bound, adrift in time, or steeped in the glowing embers of twilight.
2. The coexistence of the Rito and the Zora, more on this later. 3. The stone carving clearly representing Darmani and Gorkoran in the Goron city. 4. Evidence present in the history of the Zora, though this is vague enough to be disputed. 5. It might be a hard sell, but even the flavor text on items and the differences between the wording on things like the DLC, including the Majora's Mask and Midna's Helmet, are very specific, while items not officially present in the timeline, such as the Phantom Armor, are more vague. And 6. The presence of Termina on the map of Hyrule. Wait, what was that last one? Well, I'm glad you asked. Honestly, a lot of the other evidence we'll cover is tame compared to this particular theory. For those of you who may not know, or just don't remember, in The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, Link falls down a portal while chasing after the Skull Kid, who wears the titular Majora's Mask. His chase eventually brings him to a new land called Termina. It is here that Link meets the Happy Mask salesman, who sends him on a quest to reclaim the stolen mask before its magic causes the moon to come crashing down to obliterate Termina in 3 days. Anyway, I think I've kept you waiting long enough. Let's dive right in. As I mentioned previously, we'll be assuming Breath of the Wild takes place at the end of the Child timeline. Following the timeline split after the events of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask is the first game in that timeline. To uncover the locations featured in Majora's Mask, we need to first figure out where it would be in relation to our map of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. Right off the bat, there are a few things that make the idea that Termina could exist on the Breath of the Wild map a bit uncertain at best. So keep an open mind and bear with me. Termina has been stated to be a parallel world to Hyrule. There are surprisingly many parallel worlds in the Legend of Zelda franchise, but we won't go into that here, one thing at a time. As such, this information has led many to believe that this means Termina exists on an entirely separate plane of existence from Hyrule itself. While a lot of details about this are fuzzy at best, I don't think that's entirely the case, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand my point of view with the physical evidence. I'll skip past Termina's ambiguous existence for now, and work under the assumption that it must have a physical presence near the land of Hyrule. After all, we do see Link physically travel there on foot. I think there's a way we can figure this out. Obviously, there's no place called, "Hey look, it's Termina," on the Breath of the Wild map. Instead, we've got about 8 distinct regions: Central Hyrule, Eldin, Akkala, Lanayru, Necluda, Faron, Gerudo, and Hebra. Many of which are names fans of the series would recognize, with Necluda and Akkala, as far as I know, being the odd ones out. So, what clues do we have? Before even checking the map for geographical similarities, if you know your Zelda lore, one of the names should jump out at you as odd. At least if you're from Japan or France and have played A Link to the Past or A Link Between Worlds. If that's the case, the name Mount Hebra should ring a bell, as it was the name of the Light World's version of Death Mountain. A Link to the Past features its own parallel version of Hyrule, known as the Dark Realm, and although this parallel world is a tainted version of the Sacred Realm, it's a connection that's suspicious enough to warrant investigation. In Breath of the Wild, the Hebra region is located in the northwest corner of Hyrule. Geologically, it's mostly covered in snow, with mountains to the north, a swamp to the south, and the bird people known as the Rito living in the large, arid Tabantha frontier to the west, and a massive canyon to the east. Quickly, let's glance at the map of Termina to see how well it matches up. Even at a glance, it's almost a perfect match, all the way down to the shape of the landscape. So I think we found the place. Let's get into the specifics. If you've played The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, you know Clocktown, and you know it well. Clocktown is the major city hub in Majora's Mask. It's made up of 5 neighborhoods and governed by Mayor de Tor. South Clocktown is the main hub of the city, while North Clocktown is the least populous area. West Clocktown is the business district, and East Clocktown is the place to see and be seen, hosting entertainment, bands, and most of the city's tourist attractions. In Majora's Mask, Clocktown is the center of Termina. The question we want to answer is, where is Clocktown on the Breath of the Wild map? After scouring the Heber region and investigating the local ruins, I'm convinced that Tabantha Village ruins in Breath of the Wild is located at the area where Clocktown once stood in Majora's Mask. Let's look at the evidence. At first, it was difficult to be certain about this because some of the major landmarks that are present in Majora's Mask are missing from Breath of the Wild. Even so, after a bit of study, I realized that the landmass itself has undergone some radical change, which, aside from the simple wear and tear, could easily be the reason for the missing landmarks. Clocktown, once a busy, thriving city, is, in Breath of the Wild, now divided by Tanagar Canyon, with the broadening of the canyon cutting through the Tabantha Village ruins. North Clocktown, South Clocktown, and East Clocktown no longer exist, having been swallowed up by the canyon. This means that to examine the clues of Clocktown that still remain in Breath of the Wild, all we really have as evidence is West Clocktown. It's not a lot to go on, but let's see what we can find. As I previously mentioned, West Clocktown served as the business district for Clocktown. In Majora's Mask, there were a number of shops where the player could resupply. In terms of defining land features, the most defining landmark comes as you enter the area. To get into the square, you must climb a set of stairs heading up, while taking the second set of stairs down will lead you to South Clocktown. This corresponds with the snowy slope that can be found in the Tabantha Village ruins. Traveling down this path would once have taken you to East Clocktown, but on the Breath of the Wild map, it leads you down the path that leads out of the ruins and in the direction of the Rito village. So, we found a fairly decent candidate for Clocktown, but it's hardly conclusive. What we need to do next is establish the ruins in relation to the other areas nearby to see if it's truly a match. The next destination on the hero's quest in Majora's Mask is the southern swamp in WOODFALL, south of Clocktown. So, let's head south in Breath of the Wild and see what's out there. Flying over Tanagar Canyon, we soon come across the Hyrule Ridge. This region's geological diversity includes the small mountains of Mount Rome and Lindor's Brow, as well as several dry creeks in the series Scablands, and a large swampy marsh known as Ludfo's Bog. To me, this looks like a great candidate for WOODFALL. Now, before we get too deep into this, I have to say that it was during my exploration of Hyrule Ridge that I first began to wonder about the relationship between Majora's Mask and Breath of the Wild. The reason being that I noticed several strange mushroom-like trees. The trees were found exclusively in this area of Hyrule. In Majora's Mask, the southern swamp is also home to a very similar set of large mushrooms. The mushrooms exist exclusively in the area around WOODFALL Temple. An intriguing connection to say the least. Of course, the mushrooms here aren't exactly identical. It would seem that over the millennia, the mushrooms have multiplied, having grown in Breath of the Wild into something of a mushroom forest. One of the more notable landmarks in Ludfo's Bog is the Thundra Plateau. However, venturing here for the first time can be dangerous without the right equipment. It's an area tormented by an eternal thunderstorm that can take you out faster than a guardian if you're not prepared. Of course, once you've completed the challenge and unlocked the shrine, the storm subsides, making exploration much more manageable. Atop the Thundra Plateau sits 4 pillars, each carved with its own distinct symbol. At first, when I was researching this area, I considered the possibility that perhaps these pillars might represent the 4 temples in Majora's Mask, or at the very least, possibly the 4 giants, the guardian deities of Termina. Then I went to collect footage, of that scene a little bit ago where I got struck by lightning. Lightning wasn't the only thing that struck me, though. As I entered the Thundra Plateau, I was met with this. When the 4 spirits have been settled into their proper places, they will guide you to the hero's trial. 4 spirits, huh? Well, now I'm certain of it. These statues are meant to represent the spirits of the four giants from Majora's Mask. If not that, perhaps the glowing orbs are what became of the remains of the four temple spirits who acted as the bosses of the game. Either way, it seems clear that somehow Ludfos Bog must be the southern swamp. But let's get a little bit more specific and look at the geography of it. Lining up both the Majora's Mask and Breath of the Wild maps, making the due adjustments for changes in the landscape, it's still almost a perfect match. We can see the different areas of the swamp line up, encompassed by Lindor's Brow and the neighboring Mount Rome. Over time, the swamp itself seems to have greatly diminished, even despite the once constant storm. And traveling the foothills between Lindor's Brow and the Ridgeland Tower brings us to the entrance of the swamp that, in Majora's Mask, would have led back out into Termina Field. Then there's the Witch's Hut, which appears to line up exactly with the giant pond housing the aforementioned Ridgeland Tower. It makes sense, of course. After all, it really couldn't be a coincidence that this particular tower just so happens to be the tower surrounded by Wizrobes. But if Ludfos Bog really is the southern swamp from Majora's Mask, then what about the creatures who lived there? In Majora's Mask, the southern swamp was once home to the Deku Scrub monarchy, housed in the Deku Palace. In Breath of the Wild, the evidence of the once great Deku Kingdom seems to have been lost to time. It's worth noting that several forest Octorok are located in this area. Although the forest breed of Octorok seen in Breath of the Wild share a strong resemblance to the presumably extinct Deku Scrubs in Majora's Mask, they are not the same thing. That being said, it's also worth noting that in Majora's Mask, Octoroks were primarily native to the southern swamp region, with a few also appearing in the Great Bay Temple and Ikana Canyon. With no evidence of its people, we must turn to the Deku Palace itself. But here lies another problem. There's no evidence of the Deku Palace. Logic would suggest that, as a structure made of wood, the Deku Palace likely came to rot and deteriorate over time until there was nothing left. Following my geological markers on the map, the closest areas I can estimate are somewhere in what is now Mount Rome, or the nearby stone ruins of Sheloya Shrine. Still, this evidence is fairly significant, although I think we may need a few more clues if I want to prove anything. Now that we're somewhat centered on where Termina lies on the Breath of the Wild map, let's move on to explore the third place Link visits in Majora's Mask. Let's head over to SNOWHEAD, home of the Goron population in Termina. It's here where Link, taking the form of the great Goron warrior Darmani, braves the SNOWHEAD Temple in order to bring spring back to the mountain village. Now we know that SNOWHEAD is located in the northern area of Termina in Majora's Mask, so finding it in Breath of the Wild should prove simple enough. We'll travel northwest of the Tamantha village ruins, following a mountain pass that vaguely resembles the snowy part of Termina Field. Next, we'll head down through the Kopiki Drifts, moving along the ridge at the west side of the drifts, just east of the Hebra Falls path. Then we do some climbing. Looking at the map, you'll notice a small mountain pass at the end of the ridge we just followed. Here, we'll climb up and travel through the mountain pass, bringing us to the Cold Snap Hollow. I believe this is what's left of the mountain village in SNOWHEAD. From here, we can now figure out the location of SNOWHEAD Temple, as well as the Goron village. Continuing our trajectory, we'll climb up the mountain to find ourselves in the Hebra Tundra. Following the geography of the Termina map, we should be able to follow along the mountains of the Hebra Tundra and end up at a candidate for SNOWHEAD Temple. And indeed, it's here we come across a certain mountain, the Hebra North Summit. If you've completed all of the shrine quests in the game, particularly the side quest involving the Leviathan bones, you'll know that the Hebra North Summit isn't just special because it happens to line up with my approximation of the map of SNOWHEAD, but also because it just so happens to house a secret hidden chamber where the bones of the Hebra Great Skeleton can be found. Now, I don't have a theory for what the Great Skeletons could be just yet, but I think the fact that this mountain clearly has an interior is evidence enough that it's the perfect candidate for the SNOWHEAD Temple. All that's left now is to find the Goron village from Majora's Mask. Given the other locations we've uncovered, finding the Goron village becomes a simple task of following the path we've already built. Returning to the Cold Snap Hollow, or Mountain Village in Majora's Mask, we head east through Selmy's Spot and heading around the Hebra East Summit into the Pakita Stone Grove, which is where I believe the Goron village must have been, given the geological clues. But now that we're here, it raises a new question. If the Pakita Stone Grove really is the Goron village, where are the Gorons? Finding the answer to this question seems simple enough. First, it's clear, judging by the state of the Stone Grove, that it fell into disrepair at some point after Majora's Mask. The way this place is now, it would be difficult to build any kind of homestead. That aside, there's an even simpler explanation. The Gorons migrated. It's made clear in Majora's Mask that the Gorons aren't particularly fond of the winter climate. As a result of a curse from the masked mechanical monster Goat, SNOWHEAD experienced an abnormally long and cold winter that threatened the lives of the Goron inhabitants. Judging by the state of the Hebra region in Breath of the Wild, we can come to a conclusion. The winter returned with a vengeance, taking over not just SNOWHEAD but a majority of the land of Termina, blanketing the region in layers of snow. But with Link's return to Hyrule came a new solution. I'll touch on this more in one of the next episodes, but for now, suffice it to say, sometime following Link's journey in Termina, it seems apparent that the kingdoms of Hyrule and Termina became aware of each other. What the Terminians previously thought of as the heavens suddenly became a tangible realm to them, opening up new opportunities. The Gorons decided to venture into Hyrule, and finding their Hylian brethren, moved into the existing Goron population. They never forgot about their history. After a time, Goron City became how it's seen in Breath of the Wild, with a massive stone carving depicting the great Goron warriors of the past, Daruk from Breath of the Wild and Gorkoron from Twilight Princess, and finally, the Goron chief's son from Majora's Mask, along with another ancient hero of the Gorons, Darmani. I hope this is giving you a good idea of where this whole thing is going so far. Unfortunately, I've got to stop it here for now. Next time, we're going to be tackling some of the craziest parts of this theory, so I want to make sure that I have the time to dedicate to fully exploring what lies ahead in the Great Bay and Ikana Canyon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you real soon.